just on that, we're talking about in past lives, but for you, mate, how because you started the Markgrook Footy Show. You virtually put it together, come up with the idea and put it, and then produced it, hosted, etc. Where did that come from for you?
I was watching a footy show on a Sunday with Rex Hunt and the boys, and there was another one on Channel 9 as well. And a realisation came to me, was that there was no Aboriginal people on the panel. And I thought, no Indigenous people anywhere in the AFL media. It was just that thought that triggered that. And I thought to myself, I'm going to make up my own AFL Indigenous footy show. That was the essence of it. And so I went to 3CR where I was doing a music show, Koori music show I used to do there. And I said to them, I want to start up a football show. And I spoke to the program manager, and he sold it to the board, and they came back to me and said, no, it's not something that sort of fits our agenda here. And a couple of weeks later, I went back again and convinced them to give me a chance to do a couple of shows, and they did. And I think in the next year, it won the best sports show on community radio across Australia. And it just took off from there. So I did that for 12 years, Simon. And in the last 5 years, I did it with Terry Wheeler, who's ex-Western Bulldogs coach, and one of your old opponents. And Sam Pang, he's now the star of the front bar, and are you paying attention? And so Sam, me and Wheels done the last 5 years on radio. Then National Indigenous Television came to fruition, and they heard about AFL Markgrook Footy Show, and they asked me if I'd be interested in doing it on TV. I said, yep, most definitely. And that's how the show started. So 13 years this year on TV and 12 years on radio. So 25 years of my life I've been involved in producing and writing and, doing Markgrook Footy Show.
And it's a good point you make, because our football is made up of they talk about the history of the MCC and where footy started there, but the whole concept of Markgrook and the Indigenous sport that's been around for if most of the 50,000-60,000 years of the Indigenous population, but is very much a part of the modern game. And I keep saying you need a little bit of both. You need the structure of the MCC type historical football, as we know, but the flow and the artistry of Markgrook, and those two together, you get a really good product.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point you make there, Simon. That the game of Markgrook, a lot of people confusing this. It's not Aussie rules football exactly. Some of the Markgrook game we see in Aussie rules football now because of the way that we played Markgrook, the marking and the kicking style and stuff. So some of the traits came into the game through Indigenous players playing the game. So I think that's important for people to realise that. But, Ted Whitten, the greatest player of all, was a big fan of Aboriginal football for many, many years before it became popular for AFL clubs to recruit Indigenous players. And he used to rave about the style of game and how quick and fast and exciting and the skill level and how it just went pinging from one end of the ground to the other. So Ted would be very happy now to see how AFL football is played now, because it's pretty much like he envisaged it would be.
Oh, it's great. It's very good. So it continues to develop, and I think that's the great thing about the Indigenous population of the footy. It just gives, the Indigenous population of Australia is about 2%, if I'm right, and shoot me down in flames with stats, but
3%, yeah,
3%, yeah, but there's about 17-18% of the football population is Indigenous. So it just shows how important it is and how great a game it is for the inclusion of the Indigenous population and what it means for the people who watch.
Yeah, well, Simon, there's only, if you look at that stat, 3% of the population, that's about 400,000 or 500,000. And every weekend, there's 90,000 people participate in Aussie rules football. The coaching, playing, trainers, 90,000. So that's only a quarter of our population every weekend are participating in Aussie rules football. Yes. By far the number one sport for Indigenous people. But someone like yourself had the absolute honour and pleasure of playing with people like Michael Long and Derek Kickett. And Essendon's had a huge history of Indigenous players, and the North Melbourne Football Club and Carlton. So, you would have seen a lot of those players up close and personal and just seen some of the magic that they could turn on the football field.
But also I've said regularly that also the education, especially Derek Kickett, but then especially Michael Long, the education they gave me as a white fella in football and not really knowing that the Indigenous history, and just getting a very narrow education about it as growing up, for them to enlighten me has been fantastic for me as a person. So I really do cherish the connection I've made with those people.
Well, that's exactly the same thing with the Markgrook Footy Show. To me, it wasn't just an Indigenous footy show. Yes, the host happened to be Indigenous, but the show was about bringing people together through the love of footy, making that connection so that people could get to know each other through that platform. And obviously, as you would know, that worked really, really well. And Markgrook, as I used to tell people, is a footy show for everyone. Just to label it as an Indigenous footy show would be selling it short, because it really was a reconciliation vehicle and bringing people of all walks of life together. So, and Markgrook was able to achieve that. I don't see that happening on any other footy shows.
No, it's a good point, mate. It's a great point. Now, Nicky,